Welcome to the March 20th, 2019 Board of Education meeting. The board has been in executive session since 6 p.m. to discuss a personnel matter. And can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Someday. And can we have introductions, please?
Dave Hurst.
Willow Bear. Meredith Moriarty.
Jonathan Fishbein.
Jody Monroe.
Michael Cooper.
Holly Dellenbaugh.
Chris Meyer.
Christine Beck.
And Judy Kehoe.
And do we have PIG students here tonight?
Just a couple.
Okay, your obligation is to stay until the end of the meeting or 9 o'clock, whichever comes first. If we're still going at 9 o'clock, we'll take a break so you can come sign out. There are sheets on each of the tables for you to sign. And if you have any paperwork that you need signed for your teacher, just see any of the board members. Okay. Next up is approval of the minutes of the March 6th, 2019 regular board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Do we have anyone here from the Student Senate? To the microphone.
Hi, I'm Talia from the Student Senate, and over the past weeks we've been working on a system to determine club funding, and specifically Student Senate's role for club funding within the school. And we have a meeting with Mr. Domel shortly. We've also been continuing with the backpack program, and it's been a big success. We've packed like a lot of bags, and we're going to be doing that tomorrow instead of Friday.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for her before she escapes?
Run,
No?
run.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next is the superintendent's report.
Okay, the first thing I'd like to do is we had a couple of students here this evening who are going to share their poetry out loud, which happened a while ago, but I wanted to bring up Mr. Rickert. Where are you? I saw him back there. If you could just come up here to one of the mics and just, if you could tell the board a little bit about what Poetry Out Loud is and why the two students were selected to come share with the board this evening. Be great.
Sure. Thank you for having us. So Poetry Out Loud, for those who don't know, is a national poetry recitation contest that New York State has a chapter of. So we held a school-wide contest in January whereby we had two, both a champion and a runner-up qualify for the regional, which occurred at the beginning of February at Hudson Valley. And at the regional, there were 16 students, I believe, from about 12 area high schools. And the way it works is you recite 3 poems. In the first 2 rounds, they take the top scorers, and they only bring back the top scorers from rounds 1 and 2 to recite a 3rd poem. And that's how they determine the regional champion. Both of our students not only distinguished themselves in the first 2 rounds, but they made it to the final round, which was extraordinary. And so I'd like to congratulate both Elizabeth Hancox and Mackenzie Townsend today. Unfortunately, they weren't able to make it to the regional, but I know they're both coming back next year, so they have their hopes set.
Great.
It's been a fun program to be a part of and to watch grow. So I've invited them today to recite for you.
They're going to come up and recite?
Yes.
So Elizabeth, you want to come up first?
I Sit and Sew by Alice Moore Dunbar Nelson. I sit and sew, a useless task it seems. My hands grown tired, my head weighed down with dreams. The panoply of war, the martial tread of men, grim-faced, stern-eyed, gazing beyond the ken of lesser souls whose eyes have not seen death, nor learned to hold their lives but as a breath. But I must sit and sew. I sit and so. My heart aches with desire, that pageant terrible, that fiercely pouring fire on wasted fields and writhing grotesque things, once men. My soul in pity flings appealing cries, yearning only to go there, in that holocaust of hell, those fields of woe. But I must sit and sew the little useless seam, the idle patch. Why dream I here beneath my homely thatch, when there they lie in sodden mud and rain, pitifully calling me, the quick ones and the slain? You need me, Christ. It is no roseate dream that beckons me. This pretty, futile seam, it stifles me. God, must I sit and sew? Thank you.
If I could just add, as you see, it's not only practice in rehearsing and memorizing the poem, it's adding life to it, and so it really forces students to dive into a poem with more depth and to really be able to communicate that is what I love so much about this program. So next I'd like to have Mackenzie Townsend, please.
The Properly Scholarly Attitude by Adelaide Crapsey. The poet pursues his beautiful theme, the preacher his golden beatitude, and I run after a vanishing dream. The glittering will-o'-wispish gleam of the properly scholarly attitude, the highly desirable, the very advisable, the hardly acquirable, properly scholarly attitude. I envy the savage without any clothes who lives in a tropical latitude. It's little of general culture he knows, but then he escapes the worrisome woes of the properly scholarly attitude. The unceasingly sighed over, wept over, cried over, the futilely died over, properly scholarly attitude. I work and I work, till I nearly am dead, and could say what the watchman said, that I could. But still with a sigh and a shake of the head, you don't understand, it is ruthlessly said. The properly scholarly attitude, the I to be sought for, wrought for, and fought for, the ne'er to be caught for, properly scholarly attitude. I really am sometimes tempted to say that it's merely a glittering platitude, that some people have just fallen into the way, when lacking a subject, to tell of the sway of the properly scholarly attitude. The easily preachable, spread eagle speechable, in practice unreachable, properly scholarly attitude. Thank you.
Can we ask the two students to come up so we can give them a little token from the board?
I don't think that hurt.
Yeah. Oh, they.
Thank you.
Was very impressive. A couple other things to report. A few weeks ago, and I reported out on the school climate survey as part of the strategic plan. In one of the areas we talked about was if you take that school climate survey and you take some of the questions and break it out by subgroups, we would find some differences. So I did that. And I took some of the questions related to, I feel respected, and there was a question about instructional materials reflect my culture and background. And when you break it down into, not by grade level, but by student populations, so we had subcategories, white student population, Hispanic, Asian, and Black were the 4 major subcomponents. There was about a 20 to 30% difference in responses based on those categories. So for example, the instructional materials that are used in classrooms reflect my culture and background. The white student population responded about 85% positively, where the Asian, Hispanic, and African American students responded more about 60%. So they feel that those materials do not reflect their background. So we're going to be working with the equity committee. We have an equity committee in the district that's been established for over a year. And one of the areas you'll hear tonight from Mr. Hurst is a proposal for part of the budget to also bring in an outside group. It's called Generation Ready. Some of us have participated in work with them in the past, and they do this work with districts regularly to look at how we truly do have more equity in our district. So that's an area that we'll be continuing to focus on. So I just wanted to follow up with that with the board. Also,
Can I
yeah.
just ask a question about that? Do we have the ability to break out the LGBT and transgender community?
We didn't ask that. That survey was part of the U.S. Department of Ed, and that was not one of the groups. I don't know if the state does require us to use that particular survey, if we have any latitude to add things. In this case, we could. The other group that would be great to have some of that information on, but I'm not sure we could include that, and I don't know that we would want to, or our students who are economically disadvantaged, because my guess is some of their responses might be very different as well. Yeah. Also, the transportation studies I mentioned as part of the school start time. Hopefully you had a chance to kind of look those over. My thought when I read through those, and I mentioned this before, was I thought the proposal from Transpar was much more comprehensive. It's a little bit more money, but it seems like it's probably worth it to go with that group who has had much more experience. So I don't know if the board has any differing thoughts or agrees with that, to basically sign that proposal and consult with them.
Jody, I had asked about doing 2, and after reading what you sent out, I would be comfortable using the trans.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
One question I did have about it, and perhaps just because I wasn't understanding all of the jargon they were giving regarding transportation, will they be able to analyze our transportation routes just generally so that we know that we're using our routes as efficiently as we can?
Right, that's part of the whole process.
Okay,
Yeah.
so even if we end up not making the flip and everything like that, we could still perhaps
Sure.
improve our transportation
If there's anything.
if there's anything
Yeah,
to point out that we're doing
recommendations,
inefficiently.
right.
Okay.
And the schools that they have worked with, in speaking with their representative, he did say that about 50% of the schools have not opted to change, and about 50% have. So, but we still can gain some valuable insight, I think, into some of their information. And lab school, I wanted to just mention that this year for the applications, we had a very low number of applications compared to the past. So Dave Hurst and I met with Mr. Lendrum, the coordinator, and the BCTA, and so we're going to, they were scheduled to have a program review beginning next year. We're going to start that this spring because obviously their application process starts earlier, so if we waited till the fall, we wouldn't be able to make any changes if need be. So we're going to start it now instead.
Is that in response to the lower number of applications?
Yes.
Because some of what I heard about the lower number of applications was it was because there was a lot of misinformation on social media.
I heard that too.
And
Yes.
that I found very troubling.
Right.
And I think it's something that I'm not sure, well, we can always improve programs. Lab School's gone through some major changes over the last several years.
Yep.
And I'm not sure that changing it again is the fix, rather than a better job of communicating to the community what a GEM
Right.
Lab School is.
Right, and so I don't necessarily think, we did make a lot of changes when we had the large committee. I don't necessarily think the program review will warrant any changes to that degree. It's really to go back and review what changes we did make, and also the whole marketing piece, I think, is a big piece of that process. So Lab School's a little different than reviewing the science program. So there's a whole different aspect to it. But I agree with you. I think that some of the marketing needs to be addressed.
So the review will be of the changes that were put in to see what's working, what's not working, and perhaps a major piece of what they'll be doing is looking at the marketing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, so we're going to start that. And then I did see soccer balls flying, kicking around as we were entering. And, you know, we received several emails today about some miscommunication, that some people thought that the modified soccer program, girls, was going to be cut altogether, and then some varying degrees of that. So when I spoke to Mr. Keys in his last presentation, he had proposed shifting some of the modified levels because of low numbers, particularly in soccer, baseball, softball, to lacrosse and volleyball. So we can have him come to our next meeting, because one of the things the board obviously can consider, if we feel that we want to keep those programs in place to see if the numbers improve over time, you can certainly do that. But if Mr. Keys wanted to propose to the board to add those other sections, so for example, freshman volleyball, so we're not cutting 20-some students from that sport when we're not getting enough to field the modified 9 soccer or softball program, or the numbers for soccer have been low because teachers have had to go ask kids to try out. We certainly could do that. There would be a budget implication. It wouldn't be a huge budget increase to add those additional teams and still keep those, if the board wanted to consider that for another year or two to monitor the turnout. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I think it's a good idea to have further discussion at the next board meeting. I know I had requested additional information for Len to provide, and it'll be an opportunity to take the time to look it over and see what the numbers were for the past couple of years and compare and not make changes over just 1 year worth of numbers. So I think it's a good idea.
And we are, for softball this year, we are only having 1 girls modified team because we didn't have enough students try out to field 2 teams. So I can ask Mr. Keys to come to the next meeting with that information.
Because just some of the conversation that I had with people that came to me was that they thought that they were like cutting 7th and 8th grade soccer, and the 7th and 8th graders wouldn't have a team to play on.
Right.
It's just that the proposal was that there would be
a
7, 8, 9
1 team
team
instead of 2, right.
No, a 7-8 team. There's still a freshman 9 team, correct?
No.
There isn't a freshman
So there's a
9 team?
7-8 and there's 7-8-9, which is the
there is a
Mod
7, 8,
9.
9, okay.
Yeah. So the proposals were to keep the 7-8-9, not have the 7-8.
I
So
thought
you'd have
we talked
one
about
mod.
it, that we couldn't have the 9th graders. We just, I thought we talked about
You can only have the 9th graders on it if it's.
a freshman, okay.
If it's
Designated.
designated as
Okay,
that,
got
and
it.
that's what the other schools have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we have Mr. Keys come back, we can look at the possibilities of keeping his proposal, or saying that potentially we could look at adding.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll ask him to plan for that for our next meeting.
And I just wanted to point out the 2 girls that did the poem recitation, they were both Lab School students. So that was a nice presentation that they both did, and I appreciated it, so I enjoyed it.
All right. That's my report.
Okay. Next up is the Board of Education report. I just wanted to mention, I know we had mentioned last meeting about the Slingerland's fifth grade musical, but I got a chance to see that the night after the meeting, and I just wanted to congratulate everybody again on a terrific production. I know quite a number of board members were able to get to that, so kudos to them. And last week we had one of our character award breakfasts at the middle school, and that's just always such a delight to go to. It's to honor students for doing good at the school, or showing one of the values that we hope to emulate at the district. And the kids are just so proud to get their certificates, and I know they're really proud to shake hands with the board members who are there. So I just want to thank everybody who's involved in that. So that's all I have. Does anybody else have anything?
Go ahead.
This week, I attended the the speaker came to talk about kids in technology, and I forget his name. Tom Person, yes. I was very impressed by the speaker, and several people came up afterwards to talk to me. One question many people brought up that maybe you guys can answer is regarding our internet usage within the classroom. And some people were concerned that children were accessing inappropriate or just websites that were not having to do with their schoolwork within the classroom. Do we have any way to monitor that or to prevent that from happening?
So we have, we're required to have filtering software, and we can set it to limit whatever is inappropriate. You can set it for different levels, so the middle school can have different settings for filtering, which it does, than high school does. Obviously, high school students do different kinds of research, and they're obviously more mature, and so it's a little more open for high school than middle school versus elementary. We also do have the ability to monitor what a student individually is accessing. So if there is a level of concern either from a parent or from a teacher, our technology department can go in and look at their search history. So, but there's always ways to try and get around it, especially some kids are very tech savvy, but if we find out about it, the tech department can go in and block certain sites.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was it recorded? Could people access that?
We couldn't, right?
Oh, it was not, okay.
Copyright.
I also got to see the fifth grade play, and I just every year am so impressed by Lester Vitor, who writes it and basically finds a way to incorporate every fifth grader into the play. He really does a remarkable job, and he's a gem to have in our school district. The other thing I was able to do earlier that same evening was to go to the art exhibit in the Empire State Plaza on the concourse, and I got to meet Melanie Painter was there with a number of our budding artists, and there was quite a nice display from Bethlehem. I also learned, and I don't know if the board's aware, but the prior week, I believe it was, there was a display, a jury display in the Legislative Office building, and of the 75 pieces of art that were there, Bethlehem had 30. So I thought that was very impressive, and a big thank you to the art teachers and the artists.
We have a number of Odyssey of the Mind teams going to the state tournament this weekend, and I just wanted to wish them all good luck.
Okay, and committee reports, the policy committee will be meeting Monday night, so you can look forward to more policies to review in the coming weeks. I'm sure you're very excited about that. Any other committee reports? Okay. First up for our presentations is Ms. Kehoe doing the overview of the budget proposal.
Good evening, everybody. Well, tonight is the big night of our budget presentations. Over the last few weeks, we have covered each of the major program areas as we had rolled out the baseline budget. And tonight we have the largest component of our budget to cover, with Mr. Hurst covering our instructional programs and Ms. Johnston covering special ed and student services. With our baseline of $100,998,000, if we had a 2.24% increase over the baseline budget. That, of course, is not our final number, but we always like when the initial totals go up approximately with the rate of inflation. That just shows that we're continuing to try to limit the growth of our program costs. On our revenues, we have not put in any increase for property taxes yet. That has been kept at the same level as last year, and as we move towards balancing the budget, perhaps at the next meeting we'll be able to identify what levy is required in order to support the programs and the changes that the board has approved. We may even have a state budget as of the next meeting, which will, we're not really expecting any increases in that. I haven't started to hold my breath yet, but we will have the final answer as to what that will look like. And we can factor that in as we close the budget. As a reminder, our tax cap calculation, which is the New York State required formula on how much we can levy and still need only 50% approval from the community, that number is 3.54%. But based on the numbers that we're looking at right now, we do expect that the final budget will require a levy that is below that total. With the gap of $1,529,000 as we went into that, for instance, that would, if we levied the 1.529, that would be a 2.32% increase. Again, we don't know what the number is yet, but as we answer some of these questions, we'll be able to piece it together. Tonight, I will also give you some updates on the TRS rates and the salary savings based on the retirements that we have. So that will go a long way also to helping to close this gap. In the prior weeks, we covered the transportation budget that was showing a net decrease of about $67,000 from one year to the next. There is a proposed reduction in the overall size of the fleet, where we've determined that based on the change in our routes, we are able to sell and not replace one of the oldest buses in the fleet. The bus proposition that will be on the agenda for your consideration tonight, and that if approved will then be part of the ballot that is brought to the voters, is for the replacement of 14 of our buses, 4 large and 10, can't read the slide, sorry. I was trying to count the buses. 10, 6.
The math doesn't add up.
Oh, there's a typo on there. Yeah. That is not correct. We'll have to get that updated. But the that looks like the prior year's slide. My apologies on that. I'll refer to the proposition when we get to that agenda item. Okay. Technology. We had a question on that at the last meeting that I want to update for you. The proposed budget in the baseline was at the $2,559,000, and we had proposed adjusting those totals based on a shifting of the purchases of equipment, reducing the purchases, and essentially funding those purchases through an installment purchase contract. And there was also a reduction in the BOCES. That $136,000 reduction is here. And the question that the board had asked is, it does cost you more if you finance something over time, so how much is that additional cost, and does it make sense for us to go forward with that? In our assumptions, looking at the installment purchase program, which is through BOCES, we assumed just over a 3% interest rate on that. Over the 3-year period with those fees, that additional cost would be about $9,600. The reason that we were recommending that we make that shift is one of our key goals as we're presenting these budgets is to try to bring stability to the costs over time. So we felt that by reducing the amount of the purchase and shifting that into the installment purchase, it would help us get there. And additionally, what we like about the installment purchase option is essentially that is a mandatory obligation because it is an installment purchase item. If the items are in equipment, that is typically considered to be a discretionary line item, so it helps us preserve the funding for what is a very important component of our program by shifting that into the installment purchase line through BOCES. Either way we do it, it will be aidable by BOCES. The aid comes to us in year 2 based on that expenditure. So that was our recommendation, why we had structured it that way.
I'm still looking that I would like to see it incorporated in our annual budget instead of financing it over 3 years. I just think it's a fixed cost that we know we have to replace every year, that we should put it in our regular budget.
Basically, if I understand it, the cost of this is, you're saying 96 over 3 years, so about 3,200 a year. But that's the first year. Then the next year you're buying to replace again, so you're going to be adding to that, and the year after that. So every year you're going to be adding. So we're going to be paying this until we stop buying equipment. And I think it's, you know, it looks like a small amount of money now, but over time it's going to add up. And I'm very uncomfortable putting more additional debt on the school district. I understand preserving it, but I think if it's important enough, the board will find a way to preserve funding for technology as opposed to, and would have a better chance of doing it if we're not spending an additional 10 grand every year on debt service.
And just to clarify on that, these are only 3-year loans, so for the items that we've funded previously, those will be coming off of the schedule, so it's almost like a revolving loan. It's very similar to how we structure the bus purchases. So we don't see it as a one-way ticket where the costs are going to be increasing exponentially. It really is just a tool to finance those 3-year purchases. Either way will work. Whatever the board wants to do, we're fine with.
You prefer to just do it?
I prefer to do it in the regular budget because we know we have to pay those costs every year.
And we'll save the interest and we can use it for something else.
We have to pay it one way or the other.
I agree with Christine and Jonathan. We know that this is going to be a cost. It's always going to be a cost. We're never going to stop having to buy technology equipment. So I believe we'll have the stability in our budget because we just acknowledge the fact that we'll always be doing this. But if we can save a small amount of interest and not actually have any debt, I would support that.
Okay. So we will have just the $30,000 reduction to the baseline budget then, and those other items will just revert back to how we had presented them in the original baseline totals. So I'll have that adjusted for you at the next meeting.
Can I ask a question? You did raise a good question on the transportation then. How much do we have in debt services on transportation every year to replace the buses, and how long do we, just as information for new board members, like how many years we finance them out, how much we pay in interest on?
That's on the debt service slide, so I will bring that for you at the next presentation. It's a very small component. The bulk of our debt service payments are going towards the facilities and the work that's done there.
Thank you.
But I'll have that for you. And it's 5 years that we finance the buses over. The athletics budget was essentially flat with only a $7,000 increase overall. The changes that Mr. Keys had presented were as listed on the slide. It was a total addition of $18,000. And as Ms. Monroe noted, he'll be back at the next meeting and can review that in more detail. And if you do decide to retain those levels for the soccer teams, that would be an increase. So we'll have those adjusted totals that we can present to you at the next meeting as well. The operations and maintenance budget was flat at with barely a $3,000 increase from baseline last year to this year's baseline. One of your questions that we have follow-up information for you relates to the furniture equipment replacement for the classrooms. This is a line item that our buildings have typically not had for their furniture, and we had proposed adding in $50,000 so that we could create a designated line to fund some of the replacements for the oldest furniture, and perhaps to give some flexibility for purchasing different types of more flexible space seating in the classrooms. But we went back and we surveyed the schools to get an idea for how great was the need. We did hear from Glenmont that they had 4 classrooms that they would think would be in need of replacing, just based on the age and the condition of the classrooms. For purposes of these numbers, we assume that each classroom replacement on average would be $3,500. So you can see that would be $14,000 for Glenmont. The high school had identified 5 rooms that would need student classroom furniture replaced, and then they had identified a number of miscellaneous items, things like whiteboards, teacher desks and chairs, and other miscellaneous items there. That total is just under $30,000. And the middle school had the greatest need based on a survey of all of the classrooms and looking for 15 rooms to be updated. So in total, that would be about $94,000 of the oldest of the old that district-wide we could replace.
Do you know why we didn't hear from the other elementary schools? I find it hard to believe that they don't have needs.
If they had major concerns, their opportunity to reply would have been when the email had come out. I think some of the buildings, they do, remember, get their per pupil allocations, and some of them may have replaced some of the oldest items over the years. I know if there is money available in O&M at the end of the year, we also try to help with that, so it may have been done incrementally.
How did the requests go out? Were the teachers sent?
An email from the superintendent.
So it went out directly to the teachers' requests?
To the
Just
principals.
to the principals. So how did they vet it? Was it the teachers just sent it to them? And
Some of them
Yes.
did it that way. Some of them did it with their custodians. So what was the needs?
Yeah, the middle school used their head custodian, who went around to all the classrooms, did the inventory, and worked with the principal, Mike Klugman, on that.
Do we know if there were any requests?
So this isn't really including, we talked about more of the flexible seating options that people want. So for example, Eagle, their furnishings are pretty new. So when you think about what's a need, not really a need, but would they want some flexible furniture and seating? Absolutely. So this really is more reflective of the furnishings that are really old and outdated, not including some of those pieces.
Okay. I was just wondering if teachers were asked, or if it was the principals went around and they, like what the actual process was, if anybody got rejected for things they might need, or.
I don't know how each of the buildings did it.
So we're comfortable with the request of $50,000 because we think that will go a long way in addressing this. If you were inclined to increase it somewhat, thank you. That would be lovely. But
the purpose really was we have not had an established line in the budget for this. And so in order to not get furnishings which are 30 years old and falling apart, if we have a line item moving forward, then it will help to update and maintain the furniture and allow for some of the flexible seating that people seem to be wanting more of.
And none of this is included in any of the bond work that's being done. I know we're placing seats in the auditorium, but for example,
in the line.
D122
That's included in the bond.
That's included.
D122, the library's included as part of the bond.
Okay, so, but nothing in
No,
this
yeah.
list?
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Can I ask it? It's not related to this, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but a question I realized I had, and I think I assume it's the O&M budget, the active shooter emergency locks. There was sort of
Yes.
some small number. I'm wondering how much of.
Oh, that was to replace the door locks themselves.
locks.
Yeah, the go to push button, there were 25.
And there was a request to like pilot it, sort of essentially, and I'm wondering, it was only 25 classrooms.
I think that was it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'd have to pull.
It was
the
a small,
slide.
it was a relatively small number.
Assuming that next year there would be sort of another wave of them? Is
We
that
would
the
have
plan?
to, we'd have to, yeah, do that in increments, because it has to be done probably over, I don't know how quickly they can change all of those. You're suggesting that we should be doing more of them?
Yeah,
rather
that's
than
sort of
just
where
that?
we're protecting 25 classrooms and not the rest. I sort of was trying to wrap my mind around why.
Good thought.
Well, this is a pilot, though. They want to see how these things work before we commit to changing over a huge
Yeah, I just wasn't
number.
clear if that was the case, so that's considered. a
Was that
pilot.
the proposal? It was to try them out, to see how they work?
That was my recollection.
Right.
I'll double check with Greg Nolte, and I will report back at the next meeting. So go ahead, play stump Judy.
So to go back, is everybody comfortable with the 50,000 for?
Or do you
for
want
the-
to increase it for the first year?
My recommendation last time was that the first year we move it up maybe to 100,000 and then step it back over a few years until we get back down to 50,000. I just feel that there's probably more need, and especially since there's a lot of desire for the flexible seating, if we can do more now, it's less that we have to worry about later.
I'm not opposed to the increase, but I would like to see what the budget looks at the end and have this as maybe one of the last decisions we make, because I would be very reluctant to lose a teacher, for example, and I know we do need to replace the rooms, but I think 50,000 is a good start, and I'd just like to see what it looks like at the end before we make a decision.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay, so why don't you have a couple options for us next time to look at?
I would have both available, like the 50 and 100, do both options. And actually, I feel pretty strongly about this line item, only because it benefits both the teachers and the students. And based on the surveys and making it more comfortable, I think this is going to go a long way for a nominal amount. And maybe it's something we can't sustain, but we haven't done anything in these classrooms in a very, very long time. And we're adding additional things on here that I would consider underneath this line item, which would be getting a televised sports abilities in the gym versus making the classrooms more amenable to both the teachers and the students. So I definitely want to see both, because I think it's long overdue.
Yeah, we can have that option for, so when we're finally adopting the budget,
Yeah.
you can see where it'll fall. Sure, that's fine.
And
Thank
do
you.
you, are you gonna like rank the items, like how you see an importance, or?
So, right, we had a small group meet with Greg initially, and then we would bring, once we know obviously what the dollar amount is we would bring in some teachers to look at what, because we've been trying out some flexible seating already, and what they're finding works at the elementary versus the middle school and high school, because our goal is to try and at least standardize who we're purchasing from, obviously for the custodians, what's easy to store and maintain and clean. And then, obviously, the more we buy from a certain manufacturer, we may be able to get better pricing on that as well, so,
Okay.
yeah.
And I just meant for the, like, additions and, to the budget. So are you gonna put them in importance order, like, from an administrative standpoint, or no?
Not really. I mean, that list that I gave you is kind of in pretty much the order that, looking at trying to meet needs of all the requests, trying to look at what our priorities are. So I guess if you look at it in terms of most important to least, it would be relatively in that particular order, but yeah, there was
Give or
some.
take, there's a little bit of leeway.
Right.
And we have confirmation, thanks to Ms. Barrett in the background, 25 classrooms in the high school for $13,000 is what is included in the budget from Greg's presentation.
Okay.
We also have in the transportation budget the replacement of the bus lift. So this would be part of the capital outlay. It's in there as a transfer to other funds, and with your adoption of the budget, this would then appear as a component of the budget, and that would allow us to go forward. And it's essentially a mini capital project that we would be able to get building aid on. One of the questions that you had at the last meeting related to the creation of the next capital reserve. As we had discussed at the prior meeting, we are about up to the maximum of the 2015 capital reserve at $10 million. We had recommended creating another reserve, a 2019 reserve, also using the same 10-year life and maximum of $10 million. In confirming with our attorneys, they noted that statutorily there is no limit on the term or on the dollar amounts. However, they cautioned that what we need to be more conscious of is how much do we realistically need, because we're more likely to potentially be criticized by the State Comptroller's Office if we have reserves that are beyond what we think we might need. So again, I think looking at the size of the projects that we have going forward, we are comfortable with the $10 million amount. The other thing that the attorneys did tell us that we could do in the future is, say we go 2 years down the road and we decide that the 2019 reserve at $10 million really isn't sufficient. We're looking at the next 5-year facilities plan and we think that we need more in there. We could always at that point do an amendment to increase the maximum amount of the reserve. It would be the same process where we would need to go through and have the board approve it first, have it appear as a proposition for the voters to approve, and then that change could be made going forward.
And can you change the term, Judy, as well?
And you could change the term if you needed to as well. As long as you get board approval and public approval, you may. You just have to be able to justify why you think that is appropriate life and dollar amounts.
When you take the vote to the public, is it limited to the same day and date as the vote for the budget, or does it get put out separately?
It appears as a separate proposition on the ballot.
But it's the same ballot. We're not going to have another election.
Oh, no, 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 no,
Same
no.
one. Okay.
Single no. No, we will not. One election day is plenty.
I do have a question, though. So once we start spending it down, does that prevent us from amending it?
We could amend it going forward. Again, it just has to be board approved.
Well, the current one that we have, could we amend it?
Could we
I
amend
guess
the
it's
one that's existing now?
Yes, so why create another one if we can amend the one that we currently have? So that was my thought.
Based on the timing of the legal opinion and when I had put out the proposed resolution is the candid answer.
Okay.
We would have to change the resolutions that are proposed for adoption tonight if we were to do that.
Sounds like a new one.
We have the semi-final rates from the teachers' retirement system that were just announced. They have not been formally adopted by their board, but they've been very good about when they roll out their initial range, they give us a high and a low of where they think it will be. We typically budget at the higher number. In this case, we use their initial estimate of 9.5%. And based on their updated number of 8.86%, if you apply that to the instructional payroll, those who are members of the teachers' retirement system, that allows us to reduce the baseline fringe benefit totals by $150,000. So that will go a long way towards closing our gap.
Is the TRS rate still trending downward over the
Yes.
next few years?
The TRS doesn't issue long-term rates, however, the employees' retirement system does, and that is trending downward. And historically, TRS tends to follow the ERS.
Okay,
So
thank you.
likely, yes.
No crystal ball, just curious. Because I know it's pretty secular.
Well, and it's all based on the underlying investments for the fund. It's compared to their actuarial liabilities for the pensions that they'll have to pay out. So, but they do use an averaging technique when they're setting their rates. So hopefully that minimizes wild fluctuations. I think this could be the year maybe that the legislature finally approves the teachers' retirement system reserve. It seems to be getting a little bit more momentum. So that too would be welcome news and give us the ability to weather those fluctuations. It may be coming down now, but undoubtedly it will be going up in the future. Additionally, we have a $500,000 reduction to the baseline. This number represents for the 12 teachers and 1 nurse who are retiring at the end of this year. When we hire on new teachers, they will be starting at lower salaries than the experienced teachers who are retiring. So the difference between the salary amounts we affectionately call breakage, and that amount is $500,000 that can also be pulled out of those baseline totals. There is still, we actually have breakage that's higher than that amount, but we have not finished contract negotiations with the principals, so we do need to allot a piece of that breakage to cover those actual amounts once that is ultimately settled. So going into March 6th, this number won't be exactly the final number based on some of the changes that we've talked about, but I've listed them out just so you can have a running tally of approximately where we are going into the meeting tonight, where the gap between our revenues and our expenditures is at $811,000. And before I turn it over to Mr. Hurst to start with the instructional program, I had just one other element that I wanted to mention to you since we are in budget season. Our board members who are members of the audit committee know that over the years we have spent quite a bit of time listening to recommendations from the internal auditors that not only should we have a centralized record of all of our capital assets, but that also we should be doing a physical inventory of all of those assets in order to make sure that the list is accurate. So we asked the question, how much would that cost if we were to use a service? Cap Region BOCES does offer this service where they contract out with another vendor who provides the software package. They take the records that we have, move them into the software package, and create essentially this central database. And then they go out and they do a physical inventory of all of the district assets. So it's more expensive in the first year. It's $23,000. It's more work in the first year. I honestly was surprised that it was that low given the amount of work that they will need to do in year one. Beyond year one, though, in the second year, because it is just your licensing fees for the software, and then they don't do a full inventory in the subsequent years. They do rotational inventory. So they would either do it by asset class or by building, depending on the wish of the district. So it drops down in subsequent years to about $11,000 going forward. So we wanted to just put this out there as an option, give you the opportunity to think about it and decide whether this is something that you would like us to move forward with. It will give us a compliance checkoff that we are doing a best practice with tracking the assets for the district.
Is that aidable?
Yes, anything through BOCES is aidable.
And being on the audit committee for 5 years and strongly recommending this for a long time, and being an internal auditor, I think is something the district needs. And I would highly encourage us to spend the money on it to track our assets and know where they are.
Judy, does it cover is it just the software in off years, or is there an administrative cost? Like, will we have part of an FTE doing an administrative function on top of?
This
or
is,
does BOCES do the whole?
This is BOCES. Well, they'll have to obviously work with our staff in order to, if they have questions or anything like that. But it is largely BOCES labor that will do this.
But that's no different than any other auditor that comes in and works with our people.
Correct.
So the standard audit, it would be no different as far as time from our people.
Yeah, and we have the records. It's just a matter of getting them into the centralized software. And then we would use BOCES to do any entering of additions, pulling off assets that were disposed of, and recording things that were transferred. So they have an hourly rate for that.
It's a lot of work the first year. This is not.
This is not a lot of money
No.
for what they have to do.
It's highly intensive to come in and do an inventory on our district. So.
Well, as another member of the audit committee, I would urge the board that this is something that we need to do. It's something that I've seen now for 3 years is a problem area, and I think it's something that we really need to get a grasp on. So I would highly recommend it.
Okay. And now, without further waiting or anticipation, Mr. Hurst will present the instructional. And Ms. Johnston as well.
Loss.
Wow, yeah.
I don't know whether they're clapping for me coming up or you going away. But thank you.
You should have held your applause till you.
So thank you. Yes, my name is Dave Hurst, and with me is Kathy Johnson. We're here to present the K-12 instructional program and SES budgets. We started doing this as a combined effort a couple of years ago, as it really is a coordinated service effort, as this really does tie all of the pieces together in our program. And before we start, though, I would like to thank our instructional leadership team is here, our principals, our supervisors, our CSE chairs for coming to support the program tonight, but also for helping work really since, we begin this process as early as August when we have our summer retreat, is where we already start thinking about the following year's budget. So it really is a year-long process. There we go. So in the fall, when I do the academic update, I spend a lot of time highlighting our programs. So I won't go through too much of that tonight, but I do want to just mention that this budget, thanks to the board and the community, our budget's been able to support our programs. And in special ed, we use the term continuum of service, but I really like to think of our K-12 instructional program doing the same thing, right? We try to create programs that meet the wide range of our students, and you see that highlighted with the focus that we've placed on RTI beginning in the elementary level, because we feel early intervention is so important. We also believe that creating a program that is much more integrated and not siloed, and by that I mean since the advent of back in 2001 No Child Left Behind, many districts have cut areas outside of the maths and the ELAs because those are the heavily tested areas, and we haven't done that. We pay a huge amount of our focus to our sciences and our humanities, and we really try to integrate these approaches. And as you saw during the board meeting, we presented the new science kits to support the new standards. We're really at the cutting edge in terms of what science education looks like. We have our arts program, as Mr. Cooper alluded to, and Mr. Fishbein. Our art students doing phenomenal work. Our music program is thriving. So it's really a well-rounded education that our students are getting, whether they're are struggling learners or are very high-end learners. We're still able to add. We've added 2 more AP courses over the last 2 years. We've added our Cisco networking program. And then all of our extracurriculars support those. Odyssey of the Mind at the elementary level is just another way of supporting our educational program. We have at the middle and high school, we have History Bowl, we have Science Bowl. Our robotics team in their very first year just won the regional championship. So we have all of these extra programs that are supporting what our teachers are doing in the classroom and what our students are doing. And we're very, very proud of all of that work and all of those efforts.
So I wanted to just review a few of the highlights from the special education department as well. So this year, we rolled out the coordinated care teams. The board was terrific at really supporting that concept last year. And what it does is it puts 3 mental health professionals in each of our buildings, a school psychologist, a school counselor, and a school social worker. So we began that this year and found early on that it was really well received at the elementary level. The support was really there for students on a regular basis, as well as staff and students. We had a few more bumps in the road with rolling it out at the secondary, so mid-year we came back, and again, the board was very supportive in allowing us to have an additional social worker at the middle school, and that person has started, and things are rolling beautifully with that. Tonight we'll talk a little bit more about some extra support for the high school in the future. So we've been very pleased with how that has gone. We also started the college transition program this year. And as you know, because I've talked to you about this a few times, we only found out about that opportunity late last year. It was actually in May. And through coordinated effort with the high school team, we were able to put that together. And it has been just an unbelievable success. I mean, it just puts a smile on my face getting to talk about it. And I was so grateful that a number of the board members were able to come out and see the performance that the students put on in December. So we really, kids are getting to audit college classes, have jobs on campus, and are beginning to work off campus as well. So we are really looking forward to that program growing in future years. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight our Parent Advisory Committee that we began this year. We've had a few meetings to really roll out the mission of the district and families working together to really help support students with special needs. So in the next 2 months, we will have 3 different focus groups and an informational night. And I will continue to report out on the future success of that.
So now we'll run through the actual budgetary items. So for the K-12 instructional budget by department, you can see there that it's all of our expenses for this year and then moving forward for next. And we're looking at about a $1.1 million increase, which is 3.38%. And of that total, all but $14,000 is salary. So we're not really looking at a huge shift in terms of supplies or things of that nature. It really is largely due to salary. And then just another way to look at the same slide is you can see here that salary does make up a bulk of that. So when you're looking at a $100 million budget, the instructional program does take, as Judy mentioned, it's about 1/3 of the overall budget, sitting at almost $34 million. And there's that same $1.1 million increase again. The one huge dip you'll see is in equipment, and that is because many of the items that we've been purchasing under the equipment line fell under the $5,000 threshold, so we're now able to put that in a regular supply line. So it's just a moving of the money out of the equipment line and into the supply line. So that's why you see about a $70,000 jump in supplies and a $50,000 decrease in equipment. So that $50,000 was absorbed into the other operating costs / supplies. The other items, again, the salary line, contractual, and BOCES services is fairly flat. Here's another look at the same numbers, just by the different positions throughout the district. And similar, another breakdown of just the salary piece. And you can see that same approximate $1 million increase. And I always get the question, what is miscellaneous? So I kind of helped myself this year. So miscellaneous is AP proctoring, summer ELF, intramurals, and so forth. So in terms of reductions and additions, and again, the board has been, and the community have been so supportive of our additions over the last few years. You know, we're really able to offer a robust program without asking for a whole lot this year because of what you've been able to do the last few years. So I'll break it down by level. Before I do that, though, in terms of elementary, just taking a look at the enrollment numbers, you can see that the primary enrollment is down. So K2, we're down 35 students overall. So again, we are trending downward as the Capital District Planning Report did indicate. And this does cause us to have a slight shift in classrooms. So you can see that Eagle, the numbers in kindergarten at Eagle are up substantially, or by 6 students, but in Slingerlands they're down substantially. So one section of kindergarten essentially will be shifting from Slingerlands to Eagle. And then you also see the second grade numbers at Slingerlands have gone from 82 to 68, whereas at Hammergrail, it looks like the kindergarten numbers have gone down, but that's a little bit deceiving because we have the skills classes there. So there's actually 8 kindergartners currently sitting in a skills class that when they move up to first grade, that leaves a sort of a vacancy in that kindergarten piece. There will not be a kindergarten skills. So even though the number looks like it's going down, it's actually going up. So we'll be shifting 2 classrooms from Slingerlands essentially to Eagle and Hammergrail. And then at the intermediate level, similar fashion, we do see a change, a drop in enrollment of 22 students. And we did have some fluctuation in numbers. So at Hammergrail, one section of 3rd grade is actually going to slide up to 5th due to just the way the cohorts are moving up. So not moving buildings, but just moving within the building up 2 grade levels. And then the same thing happening at Slingerlands, sort of the reverse. 5th grade, we need an additional section of 3rd, so 5th will shift 1 section down. So overall, we'll still have 84 teachers, K5 classroom teachers. It's just some shifting that will occur due to enrollment trends. And you can also see, I know our overall average for primary, we're at about 20 students per classroom, which falls well within our guidelines. And then at the intermediate level, we're at about 22 students per class on average. So using that as our sort of backdrop, we do have one reduction to propose, and that is due to the fact that we're changing the way we're going to structure specials next year. All specials will be 40 minutes in length for all grade levels. So because of that, we have the way the blocks end up falling, we're able to reduce the noon hour aids by 15 minutes in each of the buildings. So that's the only reduction that we're looking at the elementary level.
Can I pause and talk about that for a moment?
Sure.
So what will that look like for lunch and recess for the elementary school students?
So it's a decrease in time for the overall amount of time for lunch and recess.
They get 5 minutes is off lunch and recess, but added to specials. So right now, some of their specials are 30, 35, so they'll all be 40.
Right.
I understand wanting to increase the specials. I do get that. However, I have a big problem with reducing recess even by 5 minutes per day. All the research that has come out on this topic has said how recess is very important. Young children learn through play. When we went to the NYSBA convention, the last 2 years I've gone, every panel I've been to that's talked about this has talked about the importance of unstructured and self-directed play for children. I don't know any parent who thinks that their child should have less of a physical and mental break in the middle of the day. And third, when we went over the school climate survey, we were all very impressed by the fact that the students really seemed to connect with their teachers and felt like they could speak with a parent. But we all noticed that when it came to peer-to-peer interaction, it seemed that there was a dip, that our students weren't connecting as much with their peers as they were with teachers and coaches. And I think we really need to encourage that by giving children free time to be able to interact with their peers without having an instructor or a teacher tell them how to interact. So I understand wanting to increase the specials, but I think recess is not the place to take it from.
So when it...
I was just going to go off of what Meredith was saying as well, too, with the computer time as well, in all of the classrooms, and it is very structured, and kids don't even go outside that often now. That 5 minutes is I think it's more of a big deal now than it was, 10 years ago.
So when we added that 5 minutes, that was part of our contract negotiations, and we said that we would see how it went. And we also had groups to review the specials as well. So we had a lot of discussions about this, and the 5 minutes added on to specials is not only to create consistency, but there were areas that wanted primary students for longer periods of time because 30 minutes goes very quick. We also have all of our primary teachers do a lot of play within their classrooms, and there's this whole concept of how to build in play, unstructured play, or through STEM and things in the classrooms. So I understand the concern, but I think that our students do have, especially primary, do have opportunities for play, not only at recess, but also within the classrooms. So the committees, the groups that had reviewed this felt that the time added to specials was more valuable than the 5 minutes that we added for lunch and recess. They didn't feel like that was all that productive.
Is this already agreed to in the contract? Has it already been a contract change? Is that what you're?
Well, it's not. This was something we agreed to as part of the contract to put in and review. So there has been a committee that's been reviewing this and agreed that we should have the 40-minute specials, which in order to do that, you have to, there's not enough time in the day to have all of that.
Who's on the committee?
Administrators, teachers.
Were there parents that had young children that would be affected on the committee?
No. Not when it's part of negotiations.
I understand that we're incorporating more play into the classroom, and I think that's great, and I think it's so effective, as research has shown. But once again, I think there's that extra step of completely unstructured play, allowing a child to go out and, decide they want to build a fort one day with their friend, and figuring out how to do that. And when we reduce that for 5 minutes, especially in the winter when we're talking about getting on snow pants and snow gear, there's just not enough time for that mental and physical break. So I would not support taking 5 minutes out of recess.
I'm kind of agreeing with Meredith, but it sounds like that this is not a negotiable thing. So
the other thing I would say that I think is probably something the board should consider how to address this is one of the new requirements that state ed put in place in regards to the length of day and the number of days that we count for state aid. The state excluded lunch and recess as part of your instructional day, which I personally don't agree with, because I think that if we're saying that lunch and recess is important for kids, to me, it should be counted as part of our day for aid, and it's not. That was a part of the discussion. It doesn't impact our state aid, but when you factor in 5 minutes every day for 180 days, primary students actually have like 12 hours less of instruction than intermediate students do, which if you have a couple snow days, then potentially we would lose state aid on that. So that would be an area that I think the School Boards Association should take up with state ed, that why shouldn't lunch and recess count as part of our aid?
Is that a change made this year?
Yes, yeah. Actually, it was put in place, this year I think is the first year it actually went into effect, yeah.
How long is recess time?
The principals, how long is recess time?
25.
25 minutes.
So is it going from 25 to 20?
No, it's,
Some of them are 30 right now.
25 or 30 minutes, right.
Is that for both lunch or recess, or just one?
25.
What was that?
25 will be.
So
25 for lunch, 25 for recess.
So it was 25 and 30?
Yes.
Not for all, though.
Right, just for
primary.
K2.
Yeah, just primary. Right. And that's the only change is for primary.
Correct.
Can I ask for one favor too, Dave? If I could get, or the board could get, just a breakdown of the classroom, like the number of classrooms for each level. We usually get that slide where it'll say Eagle Kindergarten, 2 classrooms, 3 classrooms, how many kids per classroom, because it gives the board a really good visual as to how it's staffed. My only concern with that is if we get a nice influx over the summer of students, how are we going to address the change? Like we're moving one from, did you say Slingerlands to Eagle or the other way?
There's still capacity.
Okay.
More than enough capacity. But I
Depending.
can provide that for sure.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of additions, as Jen mentioned in her presentation, we are in the midst of rolling out the new science standards, and part of that is replacing the kits that you all got to experience. So we are requesting some money to purchase the rest of those kits. Another thing that's been very successful is our Summer ELF program, which is sort of the bridge for students leaving kindergarten and going into grade 1, so that to try to minimize summer slide. And we've seen great success with that, and we believe that extending that so that students leaving first grade going into second should also be able to value from that experience. And so we're proposing that. And then finally, at the last board meeting, we had, during Ray's presentation, he had Shannon Lundgren talk about what the instructional tech coaches are doing at the middle and high school, and we'd like to replicate that at the elementary level, as we feel that way each building would have a go-to person, and it would also alleviate Laurel from having that responsibility. When her position was first created, quite a few things have been added to it since then. So she's now in charge. She supervises the librarians, which was not part of the original scope, and some other, the RTI program has really grown since then. So it's just become, unmanageable to also be able to do the instructional tech, which isn't fair to her or to the teachers. So we propose adding a tech coach to each of the buildings as well.
With the Summer ELF program, this past summer, did we have students that were going from K to 1 that wanted to participate in the program and were shut out?
We haven't had to shut
capacity?
students out. Actually, we were able to expand it slightly beyond our original pool.
Okay.
So this year, I can imagine that for the first year we ran it, because it was approved so late, we only had 2 sections. We're now up to 3. I would imagine something similar will happen with the grade 1. By the time the budget's approved and we're able to formally accept students, most families have made vacation plans and so forth. So we're anticipating we'll probably have 2 sections of the grade 1 to grade 2, and then possibly a third the following year. Okay. But we've been very fortunate. We've actually been able to extend our reach a little bit.
Is the 10,000 inclusive of the transportation, or did that?
Yes, so fortunately, the transportation, we're able to sort of piggyback with the summer ESY program, so there's no additional charge for transportation. So that's just salary and supplies for the program. At the secondary level, our enrollment, again, is on the decline. Middle school is down 15 students, high school down 31. And you can see at the middle school we can't figure a ratio out because you've got the 3 houses with basically 5 sections on each house times 3 grade levels. So essentially you have 45 sections. And you can see that ratio is very much the same as the 3 through 5 ratio. High school, there's really no way to do that. In the fall, Mr. Domel will present the schedule, the master schedule, and you'll get a clearer picture of sort of by department what that looks like, but we're still in the midst of scheduling, so trying to figure out sort of an average class size at the high school is not really practical right now. But it is on the decline. So in terms of additions, as Ms. Johnson mentioned, we did add a social worker in February to help alleviate some of the stresses that the critical care team was finding at the middle school. So one thing that we did have happen this year is that we have many, many more non-mandated students that are coming for counseling. So that was the reason for the additional social worker. We're also finding that some of the clerical needs at the middle school have increased, so we'd like to take the part-time position and move that to full-time. There's some cardio equipment repairs in the fitness centers. A summer step-up program. This is sort of the middle school analog in a way to ELF. It would be for 5th to 6th grade, sort of a bridge program for our students to help them get acclimated to the middle school to ensure that that transition is as smooth as possible. And then we do have 2 clubs that have been running for a couple of years now that have very robust membership, and the advisors have been doing it on a volunteer basis, and we feel those should be funded at this time. For the high school, similar to the middle school, we're seeing an increase in students that are not mandated coming for in the need of counseling. So we are recommending an additional social worker at the high school. And then the next 3 items deal with an alternate education program, and that almost ties directly into the social worker piece in that we're finding, you know, the students that are struggling to get through 4 years of high school aren't sort of what you would think of in terms of an alternative education student from years ago. These are students that are otherwise high-performing students, but for whatever reason, they're just not successful in the structure of a high school program, moving from period to period, class to class. They have different issues that are preventing them from succeeding. So Mr. Domel and his team visited a bunch of different alternative ed programs, not only in New York, but they went to a couple in Massachusetts as well. And it's really sort of a hybrid approach where students have sort of a core teacher that's with them all day, and then teachers from the different areas would push in to provide support. So it'd be a blending of using some computer systems to do their instruction, subject area specialists pushing in to help them, but a much more flexible schedule than the traditional sort of 8-period-a-day schedule to try to get these students really engaged and be able to be successful in the high school.
Dave, how many students do you think would be?
So the initial was
40 something.
So the goal is
15, right? Yeah, 15.
But it will flux depending on different situations throughout the year.
In the lab school, one of the things that we're finding is that just the lab school coordinator position has just an absorbent amount of duties to take care of, not only during the day but at night. So having another lab school teacher that could act as a sort of co-advisor and receive a stipend to help alleviate some of those pressures, we're recommending that. Similar to the middle school, we have some clubs that have been running for a while now, and they have, again, very robust memberships, and we recommend funding those advisors. The next one is facility rental. As you know, our auditorium will be offline for a year. And initially, so we're looking at some different facilities, but the one that seems to make the most sense at this point, it's not set in stone, but would be to use the egg. And preliminary estimates for that would be approximately $25,000, but then you also have to factor in transportation. So this is sort of subject to change over the next few weeks. I know we're still looking at some other options. So this is on the highest end of things, but right now that looks to be the best option in terms of where to have our musical production next year. And then finally, an additional hall monitor, parking lot attendant to help just with monitoring and security.
Dave,
Yes.
With regard to the rental and the idea of using the egg, parking's very expensive
Yes.
downtown, and that's, I think, going to be an issue with parents bringing students or students themselves driving there, either because of internships or other situations. So is there any thought to trying to get some sort of either a deal or figure out how to work that out for students?
That's certainly something we could look into. So the benefit to going there was sort of the exclusive use of being able to store all of our stuff there. It's also large enough to host. Some of the other facilities we've looked at, you know, it almost be comparable to using our middle school, although it has a bigger stage. The seating area is essentially the same size. So then you're either talking about scaling the production down or increasing the number of shows. So there's a lot of different things to try to balance. So it might be that that's sort of the, not the ideal situation, but it outweighs having to either drastically scale down our production, which would mean fewer students to be able to participate or have to do it over multiple nights.
I just
So that's a good
raised it
idea, though.
because
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it was something that is often overlooked, but if it's part of what you're considering.
No, that's for sure the greatest challenge with the ag is parking. Cost aside, just trying to park and get in and out is a challenge.
Get down there. So revenue-wise, so normally ticket sales come to us. So our ticket sales, I'm assuming, would go to the egg. Would that be correct or no?
I don't believe
I don't
so.
think so.
No,
No,
'cause
I
we're
think we
paying
would
a
still
flat
take
rental.
ticket sales.
Okay, so we're paying
them
for the venue, okay, because that generates,
Right.
the money
Right.
for the following year, so I
Right.
just wanted to check into
For
that.
sure.
And then the only other question I had is on the lab school advisor coordinator. A question on that, just because right now, like, the actual coordinator of the program is a .2.
.2.
And it's definitely, obviously, more than a .2
Mhm.
job, so while you're looking at adding a level C, is that for the full year?
Yes. So-
Stipend? Because I'm thinking about that as like, let's say you have a club, and you have the middle school musical, and you have the high school musical, and the stipend would be $2,200 for, one club and $2,200. I'm concerned that that's not appropriate, the amount. I mean, I'm not one to give out a ton of money, but it just seems like if it's an all-year position, that it might be relatively low for the type of work or the assistance that needs to be given, because even if you did an hour a week at 40 weeks, you're looking, quite a bit of time.
And historically, the lab school had, at one point, I believe it was .6 coordinator. I gave you the memo. It might have been .8 at one time. And I know that there was, when a former coordinator had it, he had .4, and there was another .4 as an assistant coordinator. So we're looking at, currently have a .2, and we're adding a level C for the whole year. I don't see that that's really going to make that much of a difference. Now, Dave Lendrum may have said to you as the current coordinator that's what he needs, but having seen it in operation, I have serious doubts about that.
That was his recommendation. I can circle back with him, though.
Yeah. And also in regards to the level, so.
Yeah, C's actually higher than B.
Right, like an A is like an hour a week, and part of that is our stipends for some of these haven't been adjusted in a while, so.
Right,
it
well,
could
I'm
be
just
that.
thinking a .2 is like 5 hours a week. It's a
Right.
43-minute period. So I'm looking at it, so if this person's putting in 5 hours, there's a significant gap in the amount of time. So I would just I would just caution you to follow how many hours the person's actually putting in, and it just doesn't seem like that would cover the full year. When you could have 2 clubs who work much less hours getting twice the amount of money, so.
I think the idea of what Christine and I are looking at is just being fair to the coordinator and keeping them in line with what other people are doing for that amount of time.
Yeah, we can go back.
We can go back to him. And then some miscellaneous additions. So Passport for Good, that's the app that students use to track their community service hours. We are recommending an additional .8 for music. Years ago, the music department was cut, I believe it was 2.0 or thereabouts, and they're still, struggling to have lesson groups that are really the appropriate size. So the reason it's a .8 is we already have a .2 part-time position, so this would couple up with that and make a 1.0 that we'd be able to hire. We are currently working with the town of Bethlehem on reviewing the scope of service for SROs, and tentatively it looks like an increase of 26,000, but that's, Judy, I would imagine, would report back if that number changes between now and the end. Generation Ready is, as Jody mentioned during her remarks, people see equity and they think it's about money. It's not about money. So equity, that's we have a committee for equity, diversity, and inclusivity that's met over the course of this year. And, it really, I think the climate survey really sort of validated the work that we're trying to do in saying that it's work that needs to be done. So our next step is to bring in this group. They've worked with schools all over the country in helping them sort of identify areas of strength, areas of weakness, and help. It's sort of a train-the-trainer program where they would first work with our committee. We have about 40 teachers, counselors, principals, support staff on the committee. So they would work with us so that we could then offer workshops for the faculty at large. And then finally, yes, more science. This is more for middle and high school, though. Especially the cost of materials, especially for some of our AP science courses, have gone up dramatically, especially as we move now to all of our data needs to be collected electronically, and so we need to finish up the purchase of some of the probes for all of that data collection.
Can I ask one question? Sure. The other question I had was on professional development on the 200,000 line item. It looks like it's stayed pretty stagnant from year to year. It was in one of the first slides. You had 200,000 in the budget for professional development.
I'll go back to it. I'll believe you.
So my question is, from last year, do you utilize all those funds?
We do. So some of that, so 50,000 of that is actually part of the BCTA contract, where teachers apply for grants each year, and we have a committee that meets 3 times a year, and we approve the grants. So 50,000 of that is already earmarked for that.
Okay.
And then the rest is more, again, at the district's discretion. But so last year, we spent the 50,000 on BCTA. Another large chunk was, there's a Google Summit that's happened the last 2 years at Guilderland. That was $38,000. We sent a ton of teachers to that. They're not offering it this year or next year, so we'll have money freed up to do other things. We also have our Title II funds, which are professional development. So all told, we really have close to 300,000.
It just seemed, actually, I thought it seemed low for the number
not
of
once you throw
employees.
Title II in.
It just seems that the professional development budget line item is relatively low. And I can't remember if it was part of the survey, if teachers wanted more professional development.
There was one of the more frequent comments had to do with professional development in regards to teachers who work with ENL students and special ed students, so that student with multiple needs. And there was also requests for more professional development in mental health and behavioral support. So we have been doing quite a bit of that already through the funding that we have, so I don't
and many
necessarily
times it's not the funding that's the issue, it's the availability of
timing.
Sessions.
And also just time. A lot of time teachers and staff don't want to be out of classrooms that frequently, so we have tried to offer more things in the summer.
Well, that's right. If a teacher requests professional development, do we ever turn it down? If there's something they're interested in, do we have enough funds?
Well, I mean, we have a process. So the grant process is really the easiest way to go through it. Outside of that, if the supervisors all have budget lines for professional development. So I mean, we do try to prioritize. Okay. But for the most part, things that folks want to get to are funded.
Okay.
We do also try to make it fair in that, you know, if you went to the national conference 2 years in a row, that's a pretty hefty expense. Then the next year is probably somebody else's turn to go. So
there's also
the committee
some
also looks at
professional development through BOCES that's free.
Right.
So it
Model
doesn't
schools.
cost us anything to send people except for a substitute. So that wouldn't be reflected in the professional development line.
I just wanted to make sure we
Yeah.
had enough focus
Yeah.
on that, and if there were individuals or teachers who wanted to get professional development, that we have the budget to cover it, so. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, guys, you're in the final stages. Got to keep everybody awake. I'm looking at this audience and saying, did you take that? Yeah. Or I can use this? Yeah, okay. Okay. All right, so can you hear me with this? Okay, so we are going to start to look at the special education department. And within our department, we break up into 3 different areas: special education, our health services, and our psychological services. So budget to budget at this point, there's an increase for salaries of $91,000 or 0.72% increase. I forgot to do that, Dave, sorry. So continuing with the expenditures by type, the first line is our salaries, and that, you know, like any other department, that makes up the majority of our costs at 67%. The next 2 lines are our BOCES services and tuition paid to other schools. I think that you know that in special education, we provide a full continuum of services for our students here in district. But there are times that we do not have the most appropriate program or care for students. So we will look to have a student participate in a BOCES program. So that top line there is for those services for the students that we outplace. Even within that, there are times that BOCES services are not the most appropriate, and we might need to use a program like the Center for Disability Services. So the tuitions paid to other schools represents that line item. Other operating costs are some of our supplies and contractual things that we're using. So now we're looking at our positions, and I don't want to go through each piece of this, but we have 35 special education teachers in the district at this point. We have 100 aides to students with disabilities that are serving our students K through, right through the high school. There are myself and the CSE chairs, who are about 4 rows back there. We have 3 full-time CSE chairs and our preschool chair, who is part-time. And our costs there actually went down because we had 2 senior people that retired last year and newer staff came in. I also wanted to note that 0.6 of that we pay through our federal grant. We have 11 speech pathologists in the district. Occupational and physical therapy, the number that's sitting there is 6. We have 4, we started the year with 4 occupational therapists. As you'll recall, we came mid-year asking for an additional occupational therapist. We had an interview committee, and we weren't able to get somebody at the time. So we've been using an intern substitute that's been supporting us, and we are going back out in the spring to look for that position again. And we have 6 clerical staff that supports our special education department. Continuing with our positions, and we have 12 nurses for the district. 11 of them are nurses in the nurses' offices throughout the 7 buildings, and then we have a, excuse me, a nurse coordinator. We have 2 clerical staff that support, one at the middle school and one at the high school for the very busy offices in both of those buildings. We have 7 psychologists at this point. Our substitutes and extra help and overtime, I'm really happy to report that this year we needed less than we have in the past because we've had, we didn't have a lot of absenteeism or health issues this year, so that was great. And then our health insurance buyout actually went down by $20,000, which was about a 17% decrease. So now we're going to look at our reductions and our additions. So the top line there is a reduction of 2 special education teachers. You had seen at the beginning there were 35 special education teachers. There's 2 primary reasons for the recommendation of that reduction. One is the success of the RTI program. We've been talking about that program for the last 3 years. And the purpose, one of the purposes of RTI is to provide students with the support they need in ELA and in math and prevent them from having to go to special education, which was the go-to previously. So with the success of that program, we need less elementary special education teachers. The other piece of that that's been extremely helpful, and I want to thank a number of people for this, certainly Mr. Hurst, but middle school and high school administration and our supervisors, we are doing a much better job of scheduling our special education students into the programs that they needed. Previously, we would kind of hand schedule our special education students and then try to fit them into the existing schedules that existed. And it didn't work after the fact. So by doing things using Aspen early on, all of the runs that we've been doing have really allowed us to have the programming that we're wanting, the scheduling that we're wanting, with the use of less staff. Actually, on the latest runs we've done, there's actually additional special education staff, another teacher, but we have not finished annual reviews and running all of our numbers, so we've made the recommendation for the 2 special ed teachers at this point.
Just ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure that the reductions aren't going to change programming, it's just the numbers have changed.
That's a great question. All of the programs that we have had running or have been recommended are intact. What it's doing is, in that later scheduling, we might have had 5 different resource rooms, for example. And when you go to fill them, there might have only been 1 or 2 students that could fit into that time slot. So by doing this earlier, it allows us to put the groupings together and then put them into the resource room programs. So no, we're not making a reduction in programs.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Will there be more students in one group than there is currently, though? Are you going to see an uptick in, let's say, 5 kids versus 3 kids?
So sometimes, yes. The answer to that is yes. But what we're doing is moving to what the model is recommending. So, for example, resource rooms by state ed requirements can be no more than 5. We are running many at 2, and not because it's the perfect 2 students or because they can't function well with more students in there. It simply had to do with scheduling. So, you know, in an instance where we might have 2 students and we feel like that's just what is needed, we have the flexibility to do that. Really, the way it was running was not purposeful.
Okay. So we'll see a little more at 5, and that's
yes,
what the time is coming
4 or
from.
5, yes, we will. The second reduction is that of a part of a teacher of the visually impaired. We have a teacher of the visually impaired full-time, and then we have part-time people as well. But we are losing a student that has utilized much of that teacher. She's leaving for graduation, which is really exciting. So that need isn't as high as it was.
Judy, the sheet that,
Kathy?
I'm sorry, Kathy.
That's okay.
I apologize. You thought you were on the hot seat, huh? The sheet that we got earlier that said that you had a teacher from the middle school and high school and another special ed teacher, are these the ones that are not being replaced?
There's one teacher that's retiring that will not be replaced, of the 2 that are up there. And then the next person would be by seniority.
That sheet, Jonathan, you're referring to is just an overall accounting for the positions itself. It doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a 1.0 at elementary, 1.0 at middle school, 1.0 at high school, because it's going to depend upon
So this
how
is
the
all-
schedules. That was more just for,
This is all incorporated in what
Yes.
is on the charts?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. So looking at the additions, the top line there is the occupational therapist that you approved back in February. So we wanted to just make sure we listed that out. As Mr. Hurst had mentioned in his presentation, we are requesting an additional psychologist, really to help support those coordinated care teams throughout the district. While they are continuing to help us with the coordinated care teams, there is still a big part of their job, which is doing evaluations. And then the other piece is we have used the same rate of $35 an hour for our ESY program for quite a few years. And we did a survey early on this year with all of the other districts running ESY, and we are requesting that we move that up by $5 an hour to $40 an hour.
and that would also be for ELF
For
as
the ELF
well.
program as
So
well.
our summer rates would be consistent.
So to summarize, you can see the breakdown by level. So overall, we're seeking 818,000 in additions and 216,000 in reductions. So to take a look at the budget impact, the instructional program is looking at a net addition of 614, and special education, actually a net reduction of 11. And did you want to do any more questions on that before we bring Judy back up?
I had some questions for Kathy. I'm wondering about the college transition program, which I love, and I'm wondering, there were 3 students enrolled this year, and I don't know if that was just because we had, at the last minute, 3 students that had interest in it. I'm wondering, given the very small number of staff, whether 3 is sort of the cap for that program under what's currently budgeted for?
No. So the only reason that there were only 3 students in the program this year is we only learned of that program availability in May of last year. So we never thought that that was going to be an opportunity for us. Actually, Capital Region BOCES was running that program for many years, and in May they announced that they were closing the program. Knowing the benefit to students, we kind of swooped in right away to find out if we would be able to move in, and we were. We had been through annual review for all of our students already, and so we went out to look at students that we thought would be appropriate, and 3 families agreed to make a change. You know, it really worked out beautifully in a trial program to have a small number. But honestly, our goal for that is you know, higher numbers. We really were hoping for at least 6 to 8 for next year. And so we are continuing to recruit students for the program for next year. So we expect it to be at least at 6.
So I love that story. Love that answer. The question though is, there was only 2 people, I think, right, that are staffing it, and it's hard for me to imagine 8 students participating with just the level of staffing, and maybe I'm completely off. It just seemed like a pretty intensive level of work that they're doing over there. So I just want to clarify that what's budgeted for this year could handle up to the 8 students that you're envisioning.
Because what we would do would be adding additional aides to students with disabilities. It wouldn't be an additional teacher.
Okay.
That was not ever part of the equation for that.
Also, doesn't the program, if we wanted to, allow to have a grad student also work with our students?
It does.
Which I think would
Yeah, they were
actually be
doing
a
that, I
great
think, yeah.
opportunity to do that.
Right. And actually, the cost of the program is really fairly minimal, as well as the graduate assistant.
That's just such a beautiful program.
Thank you.
We had talked earlier in the year about bringing mental health services on site to the middle school, which is now dropped out of the budget. I think maybe we're just not ready for it, but I do just sort of want to encourage the district to keep working toward maybe adding it next year. It just really seems to be becoming the best practice. Other local schools are starting to do it. Most schools in the city, I think, are up and running, and I just wanted to encourage that dialogue continue.
And that was a goal of ours, absolutely. And actually, it was up on the budget slides until a very short period of time ago, and the only reason it came off has to do with availability. So Kristen Connors and a few other people, Jody was very involved in this, have been looking at the options that we had available to us, and we were looking at a program that up until just a short period of time ago could not make any kind of a commitment on whether they would be able to support coming to Bethlehem. And because of our location, that seemed difficult. So we absolutely feel that that's something that we need to get up and running. So we didn't take it out because we didn't think it was a good idea. It was really about availability.
Okay. And then the last question is maybe for both of you, and it's about reading specialists. So I know that sort of my limited understanding is reading specialists would work with non-identified students, but on the parent advisory group for special education, we hear to a huge degree concern over special education students, specifically feeling like they're in need of a reading specialist and that kids are being provided speech and OT and in an attempt to help with the reading, but that it's never really going to help with the reading. So I don't know if we have special education teachers who are credentialed to provide the reading specialist piece.
Yeah, so we, Mr. Hurst and I looked at a number of things. So we pulled the, looking at the special education teachers we have that are duly certified. So a degree in special education is not a degree in reading, but we do have a few special ed teachers that are both they're duly certified. So looking at them supporting the students that the CSE chairs have helped us identify is something that we are looking at.
Okay.
Yes.
And we do have some reading teachers who do RTI that have picked up students who are special education students, and we've had some special ed teachers also do some RTI if they had, you know, a block of time free. So there is some ability to cross over if need be, with a limited time if they're tenured in a particular area.
It's just been a very loud and resounding consensus that that's an issue, so.
And we absolutely heard that, and we've looked at both of those groups. You know, with Jody, I've been looking with Heather Quinn, the CSE chair at the elementary level, so who those students are, what buildings they're in, and how we would support that.
Okay. And you think that you can do that with still the reduction in the one special education?
Yes, yes.
I have a few questions, but do we want to let the...
Take a break for the...
Yeah, why don't we?
Because I have a few. I have a few as well.
Okay, so pick
Are you now?
students, come on up, make sure you sign out on the sheets.
Unless you want to stay.
Okay, let's continue. Christine, you had some questions?
I did. So thank you, Kathy and Dave, for providing the budget presentations. I did have a couple questions for Kathy. One, normally, I don't know if you did it last year, but a couple of years ago, you would list out the number of students like receiving services. And I think that's helpful to the board to just see the number of students receiving services in particular areas. This year, obviously, the changes weren't that much, so I could see why we might not have gotten them this year. But I always think it's helpful to kind of have something to gauge it to from the prior year to see like a change if the number of students receiving services goes down or up. I know you're in the process of doing some, so it's always kind of moving, but just to get kind of a good idea.
So an overall class.
Yeah, and I think you've given those presentations before. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about was like the IEP Direct program, and I know that's where we house the IEPs and we put in the number of minutes like services by specialties such as speech therapy or occupational therapy or physical therapy. And does it give us a cumulative total of individual and group minutes as a district, like, or by building, that we need to provide? So, you know, Eagle has maybe 400 hours of whatever per week of speech therapy, or I'm just using that as an example, but.
So I run reports through IEP Direct on a regular basis, and you can put in, let's say, physical therapy at Eagle, and it can tell me how many individual sessions and then how many group sessions. It cannot schedule for me.
No, I'm not looking at it as a scheduling, like being somebody who works in the private sector and who has been responsible for staffing. When I have to determine if I need an addition to my staff, I would add up, okay, let's say if it's billable hours because we have attorneys on the school board, or audible hours because I'm an auditor, I would show this is how many hours we have, these are how many audits we have scheduled, and this is the number of people we need, and I would give my rationale for needing, you know, additional personnel. So I'm looking to see, you know, going forward at some point for the board to be able to see if we can see that at some point where we would say, okay, we need to provide this many number of hours of physical therapy, we have 6 physical therapists, we have too many hours, this is the average number of hours, and we need to request an additional person. Just to make sure as a board, like if we're reducing or adding, that we have the justification to make that budget decision. It's really hard when we're just looking at it from our perspective saying, oh, okay, I wanted to see.
You wouldn't necessarily, from reports like Kathy's referring to, you wouldn't be able to determine as a board how many staff you need, because it depends upon what level they're at.
Right.
Like that some students, for example, in the intensive skills program at Ellesmere get OT every day, speech every day versus
and that would be
some.
calculated
But
in that analytics, I would imagine, that they.
It wouldn't.
Well, not through
no.
IEP Direct. I mean,
No.
you can, again, I can run that report, and individual sessions are pretty easy to calculate. For example, if you take an elementary day, they get their planning before and after school, and they can do 9 30-minute sessions a day, okay? So if I have 18 individual sessions at a building, that's 2 full days. That's easy to calculate.
Yes.
But it can tell me that I have 62 groups, but those groups can be somewhere between a kindergarten student and a 5th grade student. So there's regulations on age ranges. But more importantly, you need to look at the goals that you're working on for the students. So I'm not going to put a student that's working on like a fine motor thing with somebody who's, well, I should stick with what I know best. You know, I'm not going to put an articulation student, for example, with perhaps a fluency student. So IEP Direct isn't going to give me that information.
Right, and I understand that it's not an exact science by any means. It's just to get an idea if you're reducing.
But Christine, I guess I don't necessarily think that type of data is useful. I mean, if you want to know how many kids get OT or how many kids get speech, I think that's different than how many minutes per hour, because we also have kids in private school that we have to service that are not part of the schedule. We have teachers who travel between buildings that you have to count for traveling. You have kids in who are homeschooled who can get services. So there's so many variables.
No, but
so if you want it, like a number of kids who get it is different than what you're saying, and that looking at minutes and things, that's really the job of staff to make sure we're making sure our staff are used efficiently.
Well, I'm going to use RTI as an example. So we have this up-and-coming program, RTI. We've had it, what, is it 3 years now?
3 or 4.
And we've made a lot of additions. We've heard a lot of great things about it. But we don't know the number of students who are getting ELA, who are getting math, who are getting behavioral services. And we've added to it blindly a little bit where you've seen this.
We shared the numbers there. The issue is there's a difference between the number of students and just looking at pure minutes versus some students get 3 days a week, some students might get 2 days a week, some students get 5 days a week.
Right.
Some students are in groups of 1 and 2, some students are in groups of 4 or 5. So to look at pure minutes, even if you have pure minutes and number of students.
If you have a student who gets 3 days a week at 15 minutes a session, there's 45 minutes. If it's 3 kids, 15 minutes a day, there would be 2 numbers. It would be multi-session.
But they don't necessarily fit together nicely. Maybe those 3 students can go at the same time, maybe they can't, depending on age spans, depending on what it is they're working on. I mean, the only way, you'd have to, the data itself is not going to give you anything. You'd have to physically look at every single schedule for every single provider. Then you have to match that with the IEP
It's not
and
a
see if there's
question of
anything
it being
missing.
an exact science. It's just
But those numbers aren't going to mean anything, is my point. It's not even about it being an exact science. Those numbers are meaningless.
Then how do you know?
I just said, you have to take
figure out
every
how
single
many
IEP, you then have to take all of the schedules, and you're going to have to hand reconcile them. That's how we have to do scheduling for special education. You have to take the student's IEP, you have to take what the time allotment you have is, you have to put students in groups, you have to fit them into the blocks, and then if you need more blocks, then you need more staffing. If you have way more blocks than kids, then you don't need that much
Well, then
staffing.
maybe that's.
But telling me, if you're knowing that you have 10,000 hours worth of services that you need to provide for, that's not going to tell you anything.
Right,
Even if
so-
you knew there was 50 kids, that's not going to tell you anything.
That's great. Well,
That's
what
I'm
you
saying.
said actually made sense. So it's based on blocking and scheduling.
Right.
So is it possible to show that to the board? Because, so Willow's talking about a
You'd be-
reading specialist.
It's possible, but you'd be looking, again, we'd give you 60 schedules and however many 100 IEPs.
Well,
That's
I
not
mean,
what-
I'm not sure. I mean,
guess
I
I think we're missing the point is like, so Willow's wondering about a reading specialists for
But
special
that's just staffing structuring. That's a matter of finding who are special education teachers that are also reading certified and structuring a reading resource room so that they're able to meet the needs of those students. I mean, that's where, I mean, at some point, our CSE chairs have the expertise to read IEPs, to do the scheduling, and, I mean, I think at some point we have to trust that they're doing it.
All right, let me.
There is
let
a
me
trust,
ask-
but I feel that we need a little more information. I'll let you go, Jonathan.
Maybe this is a little too blunt, but I've been known to be blunt. Does that mean that you really don't know how many teachers you need until after you've done the schedule? How many therapists that you need till afterwards?
An exact number? True. That's why, again, when we suggested the reduction of the 2.0, we still have approximately 1.4 of unscheduled special education FTE that we won't know until we're done with annual reviews, until the scheduling process is done.
There's another component to this. So in December, as we are starting to prepare for annual review, we ask all of our staff, the therapists, to give us projections. So if they're working with Johnny and he's getting one individual in one group and he's made tremendous progress, they might say, I think next year one group is enough. So we base things on our projections, knowing that by the time you get to annual review, that's in December. I mean, this is the way we do it, and to our ability, the best method at this point, but it's not an exact science. So we might get to annual review, which could be 3 or 4 months later, and that could change slightly. We could have students that are identified. You know, I talked about the RTI process, that it's really been helpful and has prevented some students from being identified. But then sometimes students in 3rd or 4th grade might get identified needing speech and language services. So they weren't part of that original December projection. And with the social work, for example, we've been doing with the coordinated care teams a lot of non-mandated services. As Dave had mentioned earlier, that's been a huge part of really trying to support our students and our schools by using that coordinated care team. So
I just want to say, like, I'm not trying to put anybody on the defense, but we're hitting $100 million in our budget. And every year, and I've said this before, our budget is going to increase by $2 million for pensions and salary increases, and then we have to cover the raising costs of everything else. And I want to make sure that we keep our programming intact. So if staffing is one of the #1 items that makes up, what, 60% of our budget? I just want the board to be able to see, like, how we're getting to the additions or the subtractions and making sure that we're covering the special ed services. And I'm not questioning that you're not doing it. I'm just saying we're getting to that point with a $100 million budget that we really need to be conscientious of everything that we're approving that's an addition or taking away, and making sure we're providing the right services. And I don't have a comfort level with what's been presented at the budget meetings for the last couple of years, just saying, okay, and it's not that I don't trust you, it's just, we're here, we have to make sure that we're making informed decisions, and I don't always feel that that's what we can do with the information provided, and I don't know if that's the simplest way I can describe it.
If I could interject, part of the process of the budget and part of all the presentations is that our staff has looked at scheduling, our staff has looked at needs, we've looked at proposing tonight that we don't need 2 special ed teachers, but we are requesting psychologists and social work, is based on not just some random, let's throw it out there, it's based on the expertise of our staff, what our student needs are, what we're hearing from our counselors, what we're trying to be efficient with scheduling. So I guess during the budget process, we are sharing why we're looking to do this. We talked about scheduling and changing the scheduling process to make our resource rooms more efficient, how RTI has made a difference. So that is the rationale for why we're proposing this. I don't think that giving you thousands of schedules is going to help anyone
I'm not asking for
understand
schedule. I'm just
that
saying,
process.
you could have 100 schedules, and this is why. There could be a little more detail surrounding that. So this year, we had 150 schedules, and next year, we're going to have 200 based on my preliminary review. It doesn't have to be as in-depth as I think it's coming across to you. It just needs to be a little more, like the number of students and the rationale behind why you need an addition or why you're taking away. Like Chris asked tonight, I just want to make sure that you were kind of asking, are we staffed appropriately in the intensive classes if we're reducing 2 special ed classes? And if we had some data, it is about a little bit about getting data, just to demonstrate it visually that this is why it's okay to reduce it. And you had a good explanation, but that we had to ask that question to get there. And I don't know if anybody wants to add to it, but that's just my thought.
I have, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, what I wanted to say, Chris did ask a good question, but when I put up there the reduction of the special ed teachers, that is not taken lightly. I mean, we've been looking at this extensively, and I absolutely believed you needed to understand why that is, which is why I gave the elementary rationale and the secondary one with scheduling. We've been talking about more efficient ways of doing scheduling for a very long time. And, you know, Dave and Mike and Dave, the Dave team, you know, is really working with us to do that. That doesn't always happen. So I feel like we're pretty fortunate to have, you know, multiple people working on the same things, the CSE chairs as well. So, you know, those are components of
I
it.
appreciate all your hard work, and I know you work really hard. That's not the question. That was not like the point that I was trying to.
You have to
make.
also keep in mind that we do have contractual obligations and requirements. So if you're an elementary teacher, whether or not you're a classroom teacher, a special ed teacher, an OT, PT, you have to be assigned. People can't just sit around and not have students they're working with.
Oh, I don't think that's a. I don't think that's.
No, I'm saying,
I know everybody's working. Believe me.
BCTA would never support that, nor would we. So when we're making recommendations for adding and subtracting staff, it's based on the needs of every building and every level, knowing that they need to have teaching assignments and working with students during their contractual day.
Yeah, I have to say, I think we're somewhat overstepping our role as a board here, because we have to have trust that the administrators are working with the staff to ensure that the staffing is appropriate, and we're given the recommendations. We can certainly ask all the questions we want, but I don't think we should get involved in.
It's not involved in day-to-day operations. We're elected to oversee the budget, a $100 million budget in our school district, and they're asking for additions, which I'm sure most likely are needed. I'm asking for rationale behind it that maybe we could see up there, and I'm not saying that I'm micromanaging their decision.
I think that the idea of micromanaging, I think, is a little bit further than we're going. I think we're at a point where, as elected to protect public funds, because that's what we're spending. It's not our money, it's the public's money, that basically we have to trust, but we also should verify. And I didn't think I'd ever have that.
And validate.
And validate. And I didn't think I would have that particular quote come out of my mouth at any particular time. But I think trust but verify is something that the board has a responsibility to do. It may be difficult to verify some of the things that we want or get some of the data that we believe may be helpful to us. And that's not a reflection on you, Kathy. I mean, you do an excellent job. But I know I have felt at times that I don't feel I have enough data to either cut a position or add a position. And I'd like to feel a little more comfortable that when a member of the public asks me, you know, why did you make that decision? I want to have an answer that I can stand behind. I'd like to feel that I have an answer for them. And sometimes I don't feel I have that. And that's really more what it is. It's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of trying to verify so that I have a comfort level in making a decision. Now, if I can move on.
Yeah.
One of the concerns I have is about what the state mandates as far as what being in compliance. In other words, at one point I understood we had to start doing therapy day one of school. I don't know if that's true or not. Can you?
We have to follow an IEP, and an
Okay.
IEP puts the start date as the first day of school and the end date as the last day of school.
So if that's the case, and teachers are trying to do their schedules, they're not getting to therapy right away. Is that accurate or not?
In the past,
Mm-hmm.
we had primarily our therapists. Teachers start day one
Right.
with students, and they're ready to go. Our therapists, a number of years back, would take sometimes up to 3 weeks to get their schedules in order, and therapy would start late. And that had us out of compliance with the IEP, because the IEP has to have the start date of school and the end date of school.
And are we more in compliance now?
We are working on having schedules for students, even if it's a rough schedule at the beginning of the school year, yes.
Okay, and you mentioned that these are therapists, the speech therapists, the OT, PT, they're therapists, they're not teachers.
Correct,
All right.
because the teachers has a group of students that are in a classroom, and the teacher is in there with them, yes.
Okay, and as therapists, do we have substitutes that we can call on? Because it seems that from some of what some parents have said to me is that if their OT, PT, or speech path is out, that they are not getting services. And, or they're getting somebody who's there, who's a body, but not a therapist. And does that put us out of compliance? And if it does, is there something we can do about it?
Okay, so I feel like you've asked two questions that don't go together.
Okay.
So you asked me if at the beginning of the school year, therapists are beginning to work with students right away, and could you get subs? So I'm just clarifying, you're not
Well,
asking
no.
for a sub to start in September so that.
When someone is out.
When someone
Okay.
is out.
What's the likelihood they're going to get a sub?
So we use the BOCES sub service, and when there is a certified licensed speech pathologist, they're the first person, for example, or occupational therapist, they would be the first person that we would call to see if they're available to fill in.
Okay.
They're not always.
It's not always possible.
You can't always get them, so
Right.
yes, we would be out of compliance on those days.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
But just to clarify, but that's no different than any other subject area. I mean, when a math teacher's out or an AP chemistry teacher, the odds of finding an AP chemistry sub to come in and deliver a lesson are slim to none. So, you know, the BOCES sub list is mostly, you know, folks that have certification, but they might not have the exact certification you're looking for. So, you know, it's no different than any other area. We try to get the most qualified substitute that we can, but with the shortage there is now, I mean, we're lucky to get a substitute, let alone the one that fits that certification perfectly.
And so that would also then explain that sometimes, you know, one parent said to me that they had I don't know if it was an OT or PT that was out, and there was a sub, but the sub was pulled to cover a classroom. You know, obviously more students than less, and that's also because of the sub shortage.
That can also happen, yeah. The shortage is, I mean, we're fortunate, but I mean, there's some districts that they can't get subs at all.
If we have a sub that has like a plan to give, you know, to work on something speech-oriented, we can't count that as giving services, though, because they're not licensed, correct?
Depends on the person and if they're a licensed therapist, yes, but if they're not, when you say counts.
Well, because let's say a student has 3 times a week,
Mhm.
and somebody calls in sick, they're out 2 days, so 30 minutes of speech wasn't provided. we had a sub and they worked on their Rs or whatever. Is that meeting the IEP requirement?
So there would never be, I mean, I feel like we're really getting into the nitty-gritty. I mean, there's not going to be a sub-plan that tells a substitute how to work on an R. I'm not trying to be difficult.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine.
That really would not happen.
It was just
and
about
they would
whether
not
it
be
counts.
keeping therapy notes on, you know, they did 10 trials and the student was able to produce the appropriate sound X amount of time. So no, that
No.
wouldn't count as a therapy session.
That's all I have.
Thank you very much.
So as we have done for the other programs, we like to give you an idea of, did we skip a slide or? Here we go. We like to give you an idea of what revenues are coming in support of the programs. So for special ed services, we do get reimbursements from state aid for those out-of-district placements. They are higher cost services, and we get the aid back at about $1.2 million. We also get state aid for special placements, so the $56,000 would be for a child who's placed at the UCP Center. We have Medicaid reimbursements, again, based on those session notes and submitting reimbursements to the federal government. That's just under $200,000. And then we also get some Albany County funding for preschool services. So that total is about $1.5 million that comes in to offset the total program costs. Additionally, we have a number of federal grants. So we end up getting about $1.5 million a year from the federal government for the various programs that are listed there. And the reason that we flag this for you is so that you have an idea of the staffing levels that are funded by these grant positions. So we have 10 positions who are funded by grants currently. So were there ever to be a reduction in that federal funding, that would mean that we would need to put those services back into the general fund or scale back on those services. So this is really kind of a risk analysis for you, or a sensitivity analysis of what could happen if we were to lose those federal dollars.
Judy, do we have the numbers for 2018-19?
And the reason these are actual expenditure numbers off of the audit report. So we have finished the 17-18 school year. We have not had the audit yet for 18-19. So they're close to the same for the current year.
There's going to be a downward trend.
So the instructional program, the Title I, II, and III grants have consistently gone down each year. I mean, if they stay flat, that would be great, but they seem to reduce. There used to be a Title IV, a Title IID, and they keep reducing that. I don't know if the CES grants pretty much stayed the same. What's that, Kath? Slightly, yeah.
So incremental reductions are very manageable for us.
Thank you.
Judy, are there any other places where federal funds are paying for FTEs?
No, this is all within.
So we have 10 FTEs
yes,
supported by the
federal
feds.
program.
Thank you.
So the gap, if we were to adopt everything as it was presented tonight, which we know we're not going to do, but just so you have an order of magnitude of what we're looking at relative to the tax rate. Based on what was presented tonight, that would be a $1.4 million gap, and that would be about a 2.15% levy increase. But we'll refine these totals and present them next session. I did update the multi-year budget forecast. As you know, we try to look ahead to see if there are any issues coming down the road, and we typically go out 3 years. And there is an interesting thing to consider for the following budget year in 2021. In that following year, we will have completed the next capital project that we're working on now, But based on changes in how the state funds that for us, there's an 18-month delay between the ending of the project and when the state aid starts. So in 2021, we will not have that funding stream coming in. Additionally, there are some older projects that we had been receiving state aid on that will be coming off the schedule. So there will be a reduction in our building aid component in the 2021 year. On the expense side, we will have the higher debt service numbers for that capital project. So we will have a one-time year. It's essentially a transition in the funding that we will feel more of an impact on the budget. We will be benefiting most likely. We talked earlier about changes in the pension rates. We are expecting a reduction in the pension rates in the 2021 year. So while we would be going with about a $600,000, if the crystal ball is correct, we'd be going in with about a $600,000 gap that we would need to close. That number was a lot larger prior to factoring in the reduction in the pension numbers. So it's a $100 million budget. That is something that we will be able to close, as we always do in the budget process, but I did want to flag that for you. You look like you're on the edge of your seat with the question.
Well, I'm just wondering if that's something that we can use on one of the reserve funds that we have.
And that's one of the tools that we would use to help close that. We have multiple reserve funds. At the next meeting as well, I'll have the updated projection for the results for this year and what that looks like with the reserves. Thereafter, we stabilize. The building aid starts to flow on the new project, and we are back to being in a relatively good position, again, barring any major changes in state aid or other expenditures. So, as always, we keep an eye on that, and we'll let you know if there's anything that changes on any of those assumptions. And you know you're in the home stretch when we come to these slides. So we do have the election on May 21st, and we do have 2 terms expiring for Mr. Cooper and Mr. Fishbein. And if anybody is interested in running, they can pick up petitions from Ms. Barrett, and those are all due back by April 22nd.
Do we know how many petitions we have out now?
3.
3?
3?
And next meeting is April 3rd, so we will try to tie everything together for you, give you the follow-up answers to your questions. I did, by the way, go back and look at that transportation slide. It is 4 large and 10 small, so it was okay.
Okay. So for the next meeting, obviously, we'll have Len come to share some options for us. Is there any other pieces that you need additional information on to bring back at that meeting?
No.
I think that'll do it.
Okay. So we'll be prepared for some fluctuation, perhaps in the furniture piece, the athletics, and then just depending upon what you're comfortable approving, then we should be able to adopt next week, or 2 weeks. Okay, thanks.
Are we adopting? We're not adopting next week?
2 weeks.
You're not here and I'm 2 weeks.
No.
Oh, it's 2 weeks,
It's
okay.
the
It is
2
that week.
meetings.
Right?
The next meeting.
Right, you want it,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause-
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Don't
what 2
worry.
weeks means.
We'll both be here next meeting.
Yes, in 2 weeks we'll both be here.
Okay. Moving ahead, next we will recognize visitors on an agenda item. If you'd like to comment to the board, please come up and state your name.
Sorry, it's my first board meeting, so I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, give it a go. My name's Nicole Swinton. This is my daughter Margot. On Monday night, I attended Tom Kersting's talk on parenting in the tech age. Ahead of time, I had received an email from the district stating that Mr. Kirsting would be leading a program that would provide training and education in technology use, mental health, screen time, strategies to help our children reduce anxiety, creating leaders and not followers, and finally our role as parents. Mr. Kirsting did not lead a program, in my opinion. He pontificated and he promoted his book. During the Q&A portion, he talked over parents. He evaded requests for real solutions. He said all the answers we were looking for were in his book, which was for sale after the presentation. He dismissed mental health as nothing more than a symptom of technology addiction, one that could be eradicated if only schools and parents would enact a ban on phones until age 18. Later that night, I read Mr. Kirsting's book. It was an easy read. Like his talk, there was little content, much redundancy, and even more ego. Cherry-picked data was neither analyzed nor applied to any concrete solutions. To back his boast of appearing on the most popular talk shows, he brags about having presented a segment on Fox News called the wussification of schools, which is a word I believe he made up. He lambastes politically correct language and mocks the concept of safe spaces. And if anyone doesn't know what a safe space is, it's a place typically on like a college campus intended to be free of bias, conflict, criticism, or potentially threatening actions, ideas, or conversations. Safe spaces are crucial because they protect the rights of women, people of color, transgender students, and other marginalized groups. After the talk, I spoke with other parents, and basically we have a couple questions. I understand you might not be answering those questions to me right now, but I just wanted to put them out there. So the first thing we wondered was like, how much was Mr. Kirsting paid to come in and present an amateur slideshow and what amounted to scare tactics and like a bad sales pitch? Not that I'm looking for a specific number, but I'm assuming he was paid, and it just seems outrageous he would be paid for what he did there. And then we're just confused like how the decision is arrived at to bring in speakers. Like, how was it that somebody who apparently is a psychotherapist and a school counselor, which is a little bit disturbing, how was he able to have a platform in our district when he denies ADHD, anxiety, and depression are even real? I don't know how he's a psychotherapist or a school counselor, but that's another question. So basically, I'm a little bit new to the district as of last year. I don't know how this works, so I just want to know if parents have a say in the speakers we're bringing in. Maybe there's already, maybe you're gonna tell me like, yeah, there's a group that decides that, but I don't know. Basically, how do we decide if a speaker is qualified, if they're relevant, and is there an opportunity to nominate and or vote on like presentations and talks that are given to the parents and staff? So, thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I was just going to say, if you would, sorry, if you wanted to email myself or Mr. Hurst, we could respond to those for you.
Do you also supply that to the budget?
My name's Janine Rother. You kind of went over what my question and comments would be. It has to do with 7th and 8th soccer, again. Just wanted some data. If our numbers are going down in the middle school, and we're seeing some decrease in soccer, does that correlate? And we're spending $5,000 on video, not putting that into the kids themselves. I'm just wondering if we could think about that also. I think Mrs. Beck said that we should look at the data before just moving away from 7th and 8th and just having a 9th. Our soccer team for girls did quite well this past year. Wouldn't want it to cut off the legs, which would be the 7th and 8th, growing our program from the base up. Just something to think about.
Can I just clarify, Mr. Key's proposal wasn't to eliminate 7th and 8th, it was to have a
Add
7, 8,
7th, 8th, and
9.
9th. So if you're a
Was-
7th grader and it's your first year playing, or if you haven't really had that much experience, you're not going to make that team.
Right.
So, I know there's a big push, especially in the middle school, for kids to be playing, for doing after-school extra activities. This is a huge one in this area, soccer is. I know that lacrosse is growing. I just think that to cut a program when we're putting $5,000 into a video program didn't seem like that much sense to me. Understand the softball. My child also plays softball, but there's not enough interest. She can play in a club, but just seems like how much interest do we have? Where are those numbers? Thank you.
We'll be reviewing all of this next meeting.
I'll be back.
Okay, anyone else?
Hi, my name is Teresa Hennessy. I have 3 kids in the district, 2 in the middle school and a 10th grader in the high school. And I just wanted to piggyback on what Janine had talked about with the modified sports, just in general. The after-school time is the time when kids get into a lot of technology, into a lot of trouble. I work in the mental health field. So just want to reinforce the need for the modified sports. I know that the athletic director will be here the next time, but just in general to the board, that's the time of the day that it's really important for kids to be engaged in activities. I know there's talk about moving funds from one team to another. Can we just have all the teams, right? If there's enough kids doing the teams, maybe not softball, but I know volleyball is a big draw for certain kids. So I would think that would be really, the money really well spent. So if we could visit this the next time and have a really good discussion about it, I will be back as well. So thank you.
Anyone else?
So my name is Susan Schaller, and I'm a parent in the district, and I just wanted to come express that based on my experience as a parent, I think there really is a very serious need in the district for more expertise when it comes to teaching children with reading disabilities. And I think it's a serious issue, that warrants further study by the district and consideration of the different potential options. And I can think of a wide array of potential options, but I think this is an issue where, and maybe reading specialist isn't the right term because that implies RTI teacher, but there seems to be a need for more expertise at the resource room level so that kids with reading disabilities can be taught to read in the K through 5 time period. And I would think if this ability was enhanced in the district, it could potentially save money at middle school and high school level. You'd have kids who are more able to participate. You know all the benefits of teaching children to read, but I just wanted to express, I think it really is a place where this is an excellent school district. I'm glad the district has started to look at the issue more, but there are kids who right now are not being taught to read who could be taught to read. And I think in such a wonderful community and such an excellent district, that's an issue that warrants further examination. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Anyone else? Next is finance action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following finance action items 1 through 4.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes, and we thank the Johnsons for their donation. Next is professional personnel action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following professional personnel action items 1 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Support personnel action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following support staff action items 1 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Other action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following action items 1 through 2.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Point of order.
Yes?
There's a file attachment for school district officer and employee code of ethics, which I thought had been removed from the agenda. I don't see it on,
I think
on
just
second reading, but it is.
The
in
attachment didn't get removed.
Okay,
So
but,
it's not
so
a-
we're not voting on that?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Did we get through the voting on that?
Got to do it again.
Okay.
Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Resolution for the 2019-20 bus replacement purchase.
So moved.
Whoop, hold on. It is recommended that the board, calm down.
Want to get out of here.
It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following action item regarding the 2019-20 bus replacement proposition.
Now?
Now.
So moved.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Resolution for 2019 Capital Reserve Fund. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following action item regarding the 2019 Capital Reserve Fund.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Approval of notice of 2019 annual election. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following action item regarding the 2019 notice of annual election.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Next, we will recognize visitors on a non-agenda item. Going once, going twice, sold. Okay. Next is future meetings and events. The next board meeting will be, well, there'll be a policy committee meeting Monday, the 25th at 6 p.m. Next regular board meeting will be Wednesday, April 3rd, 7 p.m. here at the high school with a 6 o'clock anticipated executive session, though we're talking about changing that to 5:30.
Possibly, I'll let you know. if
Okay.
It needs to be changed.
And then Wednesday, April 17th, we'll have another regular board meeting at 7 p.m. here at the high school, 6 o'clock anticipated executive session. And I will be out of the country for that meeting, so I will leave you in Holly's capable hands.
And I will be in Oregon, so it'll be the fun.
Okay. But we'll still have a quorum. Okay. There's no reason for us to go back into executive session, so can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Thank you, everyone.